Well, I think most gardeners at some time have probably either planted a tree or shrub in the wrong location, or it's outgrown its particular planting spot. Well, that means we either have to cut them down or remove them, and as expensive as some plants are getting these days, most gardeners would probably prefer to move it to another location. Well, Dr. Janet Cole and Senior Agriculturist Charlie Gray both explain and demonstrate how to make this transition a little bit easier using a procedure called ball and burlap.
Ball and burlap is a harvesting technique for field-grown trees in which the trees are dug with soil around the root systems, and then burlap is used to wrap those for transport. Some trees grow better under field production conditions than in containers, and so this is a method that we can use to harvest those trees and get them to the consumer landscape in live condition and keep them surviving and lessen our transplant shock. The best time to ball and burlap is going to be when the trees are dormant, and so normally late fall to early spring would be the best. My program in teaching includes teaching a nursery production class, and of course if you're going to be a nursery producer and have a field-grown nursery, then you're going to have to know how to be able to harvest your trees out. And so we have a couple of labs each year to teach the students how to do that. Also, my research responsibilities include research on nursery crops, and since field production is an important part of the nursery industry, of course that's got to be something that we look at, is harvest techniques and production techniques, and balling and burlapping will be included in that. To ball and burlap, what you will need to do is basically dig down around the tree. And there are some things to keep in mind. One is that, of course, that soil around the root system is going to be very heavy. And so one way to get around some of the weight that would be involved and cut down on some of the transportation costs is to remove just the top inch or so of soil around the tree as you get started, and that'll take away some of the weight. Then at that point you want to spade down around the tree, and that will cut the roots and make a root ball as such around the tree, and at that point you can begin to trench it. And once you've got a trench made, then you'll need to undercut so that you cut the bottom roots that go straight down into the ground underneath the tree. And you want to make sure as you do that that you begin to put your burlap into the hole. You don't want to lift the tree out onto the burlap. You want to put the burlap into the hole and roll the tree onto it. And that takes care of the possibility that the ball might break. You're being real careful there not to break that ball. And so once you've got the tree onto the burlap, you can pull the burlap up around the ball itself, and it's normally pinned with pinning nails and then secured in place with a twine of some type. There are guidelines for ball sizes. If you're digging commercially, the American Association of Nurserymen has a guideline for ball sizes. If you're not digging commercially, a rule of thumb is that you want the ball size to be about 10 to 12 times the diameter of the caliper size of the tree, about a foot above the soil line. So in other words, if you've got a 1-inch caliper tree at a foot above the soil line, you want a 10 to 12-inch ball.
Well, not only is Charlie Gray a master ball and burlapper, but he's also quite the carpenter. Back in 1986, Charlie built the barn behind me, and as most of you know, it's become the focal point here at our studio gardens. Well, once you've got your ball and burlap complete, or whether or not you just may have gone out and purchased one, you need to make sure that you plant it properly too. And remember, that means that you need to plant it the same depth that it was grown, and we took a little bit of the surface off, as well as putting it in a hole that is much wider in circumference or diameter. And the reason for that is so the roots can grow out more horizontally. Now, a lot of the garden centers and professionals are going to tell you that you can leave the burlap right on it. I've answered too many questions and seen too many problems where that has actually been the cause of problems. And so feel and see if the ball still feels pretty secure and you've got your tree as straight as you want to get it. Go ahead and try to take that burlap off. And remember, you need to check and see how they've put it together. And just peel it away. And just like Charlie did in working the burlap under it, would be the same thing that you would do when taking it off. And just rock the tree a little bit where you can pull it underneath and get as much of that off as you can. Now again, you can see that this burlap and the ball is pretty strong. Now the reason why obviously is because there's another level under there, another layer, and that's something you've really got to check for, because a lot of times they'll be in the nursery so long that they'll have to replace them. Most importantly is to cut this twine off, as we're going to take this other one off. During our travels on the show, last year in Tulsa, we came across a situation where they'd actually planted the trees wrong. Not only did they leave the burlap on, they planted them too shallow and they left this plastic on, and as we cut it off, you could tell where it was girdling the tree, so they were stunted. They'd been there several years and hadn't grown hardly at all. Now, if the root ball should feel too loose and you're worried about it falling apart, just go ahead and remove as much of the burlap on the top as you possibly can and maybe roll it down, and of course you could cut off any of the excess, and that would still help and not disturb the root ball too much. Now, on bigger trees and shrubs, not only will you find burlap, but sometimes you'll find wire cages or frames that hold the ball a little bit more securely. And the same principle really holds true. If it feels tight as far as a root ball, go ahead and try to cut that wire off if possible and just peel it away, and then do the same with the burlap. But if you're a little leery again, maybe loosen it up some and then try to cut the burlap again away from the root ball, so you'll be able to expose some roots where they can grow out horizontally. But the most important thing to remember is to at least pull the burlap away so it's not above the soil planting level, because it will act as a wick and dry the root system out. And whatever you do, try to take as many of the nails and cut away that plastic so you don't girdle the tree.